Hi there, everybody. This is me, Patricia Windrow, at the Cable Easel once again, program of Painting from Life. And when it's a scene, the best that we can do is to do it from a monitor of a tape that was shot at a different time. This is Heckscher State Park. This particular program is going to be done in two parts, part one and part two, and hopefully we'll get it pretty well resolved in the space of an hour. Heckscher State Park is on the south shore of Long Island, as you know, somewhere in the middle of it. And there is a body of water called the Great South Bay, and there are some rather wonderful buildings in this particular place, and a lot of things happen there. Picnics, outings, swimming, concerts in the open air, and in general a quite wonderful place for the public to go free of charge. And it is within really easy access of just about anybody who lives in Suffolk County. So here is a wonderful composition which is actually more sky than anything else, with an incidental building, but this happens to be Heckscher State Park. The composition is extremely simple. It is divided into almost 7/8 of the composition is sky. And so, laying out that particular theme, it is going to be perfectly straight band of foreground, which is which means that the rest of the canvas is going to be devoted to a tremendous amount of monochromatic tone, the sky. But the point of this particular composition is to get the manner in which you paint a sky, which I find a lot of people are a little intimidated by, and to be able to talk about how you render clouds. Many times people who begin to paint would love to do skies, but the clouds turn out to be a rather mysterious and difficult problem to solve. So this program is probably going to be devoted to merely how do you paint clouds. Here are two lines. This is the foreground, this is the diagonal, which is what should always be in a painting for interest in composition, and here is the incidental tree, vertical, whatever you may want to say, that occupies this much space in the middle ground, and the rest of it is going to be devoted to sky. Sky pictures are always wonderful to live with. They're also quite interesting to do, and they have a sort of an airy, wonderful quality about them, and everybody loves to look up at the sky, and it's nice to be able to have it frozen in time in a canvas. Here is this wonderful willow tree, which has lost all its green because this is the time of year when that happens, but it still retains a nice shape. And shape is the other part of composition which everyone must be aware of if you're going to be painting in a realistic manner. Back here are some little triangles which tell you that there is a building that is going off into the distance, but it has to be put in just because you're going to have to be rendering it as the canvas proceeds. This great brick wall that is in the front of this whole thing is an enclosure in this complex of buildings. What is housed in this building, I'm not too sure, but it is quite a wonderful 50s version of an administrative building in a public place. a lot of things happen in buildings like this: administration, running the whole thing, whatever is needed to operate a public facility. And in this public facility, this building is the housing of this wonderful facility. It is a bunch of triangles, which of course are always extremely interesting. Triangles and verticals are what make compositions fun. And then there's this little sort of a cupola up here, which smacks of the 19th century. Stuck on top of this building is a little cupola, probably more for decoration than anything else. I doubt that it has any function. I don't think it's got a church bell in it, or it's got anything to summon the public to it. But it is a little decoration on the top of this building. Okay. Everything here is extremely simplified because of the fact that it's late in the day and things are silhouetted. But here is the space that this little tree is occupying, and maybe it is not quite visible in what you're seeing on your monitor, but there is another little triangle here, which is another small administrative building, and the triangle over here is part of another little building, which of course is going to tell you that this is a rather large bunch of happenings going on in here. Somewhere in the distance there is a water. The Great South Bay is over here. It is not visible because of the transmission, and because the tape may be a little bit pale, but we do want to get the water in here because that's typical of Long Island scenes. And then there's this sort of a strange looking little African looking tree. I don't know what kind of a tree it is, but it certainly looks like it's on the veldt in somewhere in Africa, and it's off there silhouetted in the distance. And another little one. Little details, which of course are always interesting in realistic painting. You must have the details. Now the rest of it is all going to be concentrating on sky. I have a feeling that maybe this ought to be a little bit, well, no, that's okay. That's a good angle for it. Sky. Sky is the thing that distinguishes any composition that's done on this planet from having it as a space painting, or as a fantasy, or as an underworld painting in caves. Sky is what we live with overhead at all times of our days. And paintings of skies have been done for as long as painting has been around, and has always been the subject interesting to artists and also to viewers. I'm going to begin, as I usually do, by applying the large areas with a palette knife, because when you're working out of doors, you are working against something called time and the change of light. And so to cover large areas rapidly before the light changes is essential. And I've talked about this before. And I've also talked about not carrying tremendous quantities of equipment out in the field, because it's difficult enough already to take canvases and have to remove a wet canvas from a place. If you're on foot, if your car has been parked somewhere in a parking lot, you have to be able to remove the wet painting, and so the less encumbrance, the better. So mixing on the canvas is acceptable. It looks pretty strange to some people, but it's perfectly acceptable, and it's what I usually do when I'm out there. Now, here is and mixing the color with this palette knife should be done so that there are no more streaks left in it. I find that one of the amateurish signs about painting is if you leave the streaks from the palette knife. It is not my thing, and I would like to emphasize that it should never be left with streaky. The blending of I'm going to go right over the layout of the tree. I just put it there for location, because the tree is going to be somewhat silhouetted against this entire background. So everything that I drew before was purely a demonstration, because overlaying the paint is how you paint the foliage in landscapes. The pale quality of the sky in Long Island scenes is typical of this particular part of the world. You will find that it is pale, very, very pale towards the horizon, and becomes gradually darker as it goes up into the stratosphere. And stratospheres was something we're going to be talking about today with this sky picture. There was a wonderful sky artist called Everett Sloane. He illustrated a number of books about aviation, and he mastered the business of painting and drawing skies. If you can remember the name, or if you're at all interested, do go to a library and find some books that Eric Sloan did. He did one on barns and also a very comprehensive one on the painting of skies. It's a good lesson to learn. I'm not the only one that is trying to demonstrate this. He tried to demonstrate it as well. But I think that you will be really interested if you like this subject matter, namely, how do you paint skies and where do you start? So here's where you start, putting the very pale color on in the lower part down towards the horizon, and then gradually trying to blend it to the darker one as you get higher up, until maybe sometimes you can get into a very intense blue in the sky, which is then done with the cerulean blue is what I used for the pale parts, and ultramarine blue is what happens for the darker parts. The sky has many, many colors, and we all think it's just plain blue, but when you get out there to paint it, you'll find that it is many different shades of blue, depending upon, of course, the time of day and the time of year. So here is probably about as deep as I want to get for the top part of this painting, and this is to be. I'm applying it rather thin. You can hear that the palette knife is scraping very close to the canvas. This is a canvas board, by the way, because when you're learning, you do not have to go to the expense of having stretched canvas, which is more expensive than canvas board, and canvas board is very serviceable. It is also puncture proof in case you ever need to transport these things and you can't get holes in it. The worst thing that you could do is to really put your foot through it or bend it. So these canvas boards, which come to probably at this size $2 a piece at the most, depending upon where you go, and they are quite satisfactory for beginners and for also people who want to economize, and these will last as long as canvas, sometimes maybe even more so. So applying this top layer, and then as you get down towards the light area towards the horizon, that's when a brush is in order to blend it, because I'm going to be doing a brush painting, even though I'm applying it first with a palette knife. The palette knife is purely for expediency in speed. Naturally, the white is the basis of any pale tone in oil painting, as opposed to watercolor, where there is no white paint. Watercolor depends upon the white of the paper for the white, and that means that it's an entirely different technique, and incidentally far more difficult than oil painting. With oil painting, you can in fact do layers and go back over it and correct mistakes. In watercolor, mistakes are made, and that's where they stay. So here is the darker area. As you can see, it has gotten progressively more intense as it gets towards the top of the canvas, and I'm making these two merge down here, and for a smooth effect, well, I need a little bit more. As you can see, also a tremendous quantity of white is used, and I'm using pure colors out of the tube. I'm using cerulean blue and white for the lighter parts, and because the time of day does not yet have a sunset in it, there is no vestige of pink or rose. Skies are colored by the position of the sun, and when the sun begins to wane in the horizon, a pinkish tone takes place. Sometimes lavender, sometimes green, all depends upon the atmosphere. I'm going to get rid of all these streaks here and then blend this with a brush, and with the possibility of being able to see very closely how I do that. The advantage of a television program is that you can get really close with the camera, so that you can see how I'm blending these two. This looks a little bit disconnected, and so I'm going to be using a rather soft brush to give a blend, and it's a little one, but it's nice purposeful strokes, and it will give you the look that you are after. You are after not 4-inch wide blendings with a house brush, but small and deliberate strokes with a fine arts brush, namely sable. This is a square cut, soft number 6 or 8 sable. It's a number 5. And this will blend all of the pale and the darker tones together in a nice in a nice smoothish way. Nothing smooth whereby you go across the canvas as if you were rolling the wall, but you do want to have a fairly decent blend from dark to light. On top of this will be the overlay of clouds. The second part of this program, the whole two sections of this show, part one and part two. Part one will be devoted almost entirely to the painting of the sky and the clouds, and then then when the second program comes on, you will already have that done, and then the buildings and trees and general technique of putting the foliage in against the sky will be the second part. It's a nice division. You certainly would plan it that way when you're out there. In the meantime, the plan is now that I take a very short break, because that's the way we do it. Break a little bit in the middle. So I'll be back very soon. Are back again, preparing this rather large area of sky blue, which goes from darker way up above, overhead, to paler as it goes towards the horizon. The reason that happens is atmosphere. On Long Island, there is a very definite specialized atmosphere because of the presence of water on both the North Shore and the South Shore. And there's a difference in this particular landscape painting than there is from when the mountain paintings that I do. There is a vast difference between the two. But your screen is now showing you what appears to be a totally blue background. Actually, it does blend from pale to darker. I'm going to put a little bit more dark up here, and I'll show you how it blends in because it's nice and wet still. And it needs some more of this up here for the three-dimensional effect that you get when you look when you look at a sky, you tend to scan it from top to bottom. You're not on a fixed point. And so what painting skies tries to do is to give you the illusion that you are scanning a very large area of sky. There was an eclipse not too long ago, and that was a remarkable sight at midnight. I saw it at midnight, and the sky, you scan the sky even though it's black, and that is what the attempt is in these paintings of sky. All right, we now have here a prepared blue background. My trusty palette knife, which has got some blue on it from having applied it before, I'm going to wipe clean. I've talked about this before. The ability to get an absolutely clean instrument with which to work is essential, especially when you're working with pale colors. As you can see, the shine on this palette knife tells you that you're down to the bare steel. It's very flexible, and it also wipes in virtually no time. A couple of wipes and it's clean as the day it was bought, and will not have any residual color in it, which is what drives an awful lot of people. It's very trying to a lot of people who are attempting to paint in oils because hairs retain color no matter how well you rinse them. All right, we now have here the need to apply clouds. Clouds move. They move all the time, and some of them have different patterns. Other ones are very specific, and on this particular monitor you'll see that some of them are cumulus clouds. That means they have accumulated into many. I'm not a cloud expert, but I did read Eric Sloane's book, so I know some of the terms. The fact that the paint is now wet means that you're going to be able to do blending where you need to and make them wispy when you need to. This is virtually impossible if you don't prepare the canvas first, and if you allow a great deal of time to dry between the time that you do the clouds and you've put the basic color of the sky in. The brush will pick up the wet blue that is underneath it and will blend it. Now, it is almost never possible to see a cloud looking like a sheep. A lot of people seem to think that the clouds are just round on top and round on bottom. Well, they're not. They more than likely, they change a great deal and they have different patterns, but for the most part, they are bright. And in this case, I'm using pure white. They are bright on the top, and then they fade off into nothing on the bottom. And as you can see, the brush will do that almost by itself. When you have a larger area, such as the wispy cloud that is wafting or sailing across the sky over the building, it is extremely wispy. Therefore, it will blend very nicely and in a very cooperative way into the background of blue that I put in before. I am using, as usual on some of them, I'm using quick drying white with a brush technique. I usually use the palette knife only with the quick drying white. But if you want to get this kind of an effect of wispy clouds, the white has set, the pale blue has set enough for it to not be too wet for the brush to pick it up. And I hope that that's clear. And I see over here there is a very bright white head to this little cloud here, and then it sort of blends off into wispiness. Clouds are essential for outside painting, and it is rare that a absolutely clear sky happens, and it's also rare to find an interesting sky if it doesn't have some clouds in it. Clouds make for interest. Down here there are some what I call little upside down clouds. Well, not really. They're not upside down, but they are little cumulus clouds that are down near the horizon. They have a particular name. I think they are also called cumulus, not stratocumulus. Stratocumulus means that they're way up high in the sky. Just little cumulus clouds on the horizon are what take place, especially in the fall. These little banks of clouds take place. Got something to do with the weather condition, but they do lie rather close to the horizon. And these, nicely enough, are going off at an angle. The world is round, and clouds do what they want to do. They're floating around up there, and sometimes they are little banks that are diagonal, something that I always talk about. The diagonal is what makes it interesting. So here we have a little bank of diagonal white puffy little clouds that are making for interest. Up above, there is also, I'm going to also introduce another color for the ones that are up above, because the sun can in fact catch some of the higher clouds and give them a tone. So I'm going to run this little this little diagonal bank of clouds here. And as I need to point out that clouds do change position, and so if you see it change, do not let that upset you. That's the way, whatever you've put on there, leave it there. All right, I'm going to now, with the slightest, only the very, very slightest touch of orange to give it a tone which is just a little bit off of white. I'm going to give it a touch of, but I mean ever so slight, because they are not orange clouds, but they do have a little glow on them from the sun, and they are up here in the very top of the painting. It may be too subtle for the camera to point out, but I can sure see it, that it's got a pinkish tone to it. And clouds are the most subtle thing besides flowers that you can ever choose to paint. They are elusive, they are sometimes very fast moving, and they are never ever the same twice. The weather conditions have made it so that not once in anyone's lifetime will you ever see a cloud formation which is the same as you ever saw before, which of course makes them not only mysterious but also extremely playful. Clouds play with us, and how many people, I'm sure, have spent childhood hours looking up at the clouds and seeing things in them. Be it animals or places or faces and so on. So clouds are a part of every single day of our lives. And if you have ever felt like painting them, this should be the opportunity. And I'm hoping that whoever watches these programs has sort of taken it upon themselves to tape them so that they can have it. These are timeless programs. These will not get stale. These particular lessons will always be relevant to anybody who is taking up painting of any kind. And I've been wanting to do a cloud study for a very long time, and this is it. Now we're doing it. So even though it may not be visible to you as clearly as it is to me because of the transmission, these clouds up here are slightly more rosy than the ones down below. And then there are little puffy ones up here that can be put on sort of arbitrarily, kind of just, Georgia O'Keeffe did this with a whole bunch of bank of clouds. She did a lot of just little round lammy dots, and it's a wonderful painting. Of course, the reason that it's wonderful is that it happens to be 40 feet long and 20 feet high, and that's what makes it such an extraordinary painting. If anybody is interested in seeing cloud paintings, a cloud painting, by all means go and see the one that Georgia O'Keeffe did. She not only did big flowers, but she also did cloud paintings, and they are from the West, where it's all sky and all clouds, and she did one of the definitive and ultimate cloud paintings. Here is probably about as much as you could do. I think that maybe I'd like to introduce a little bit of paler tone down here towards the horizon, because I'm sure that were it not for the fact that this tape shows me it's blue all the way down, I know perfectly well, having painted this area for a very, very long time, that the horizon is always very much paler than anywhere else in a bank of really atmospheric coloring. And it's what makes these Long Island paintings of mine, which are surrounding me, by the way. These are all paintings that I've done on the show, and paintings that you may or may not recognize. And of course, because it's getting chilly out, I brought some snow pictures. I remember that one. I remember that one with the horses. But here's the part one of my program of clouds over Heckscher State Park. If you've been out there, I'm sure you've lain on your back on the grass, looked up at the sky, and you may have seen some color scheme very similar to this. I hope that you got something out of part one, and that you will tune in to get the conclusion of this painting of the great outdoors. Thanks for watching. See you again. Bye.